The morning of March 15th, 44 BC, dawns with a heavy sense of dread. In Rome, Calpurnia, the wife of the world's most powerful man, wakes from a nightmare. She dreamt she was holding her husband's bleeding body. Terrified, she begs him not to go to the Senate that day. Across the city, a group of senators are waiting, daggers hidden in the folds of their togas. Their nervous energy is electric. The omens have been bad, the warnings have been given, and the entire city seems to be holding its breath. Still, Julius Caesar hesitates. His fate hangs in the balance until a knock comes at the door. It's Decimus Brutus, one of his most trusted friends, arriving to escort him to the theater of Pompey. It's a walk from which Caesar will never return. This was just the final act of a plot that had been months in the making. To understand how the most powerful man in the world was brought down by his own allies, we need to go back. Not just a few months, but years, to see how the seeds of this conspiracy were first planted. So, how did it all come to this? In early 44 BC, the Roman Republic was a republic in name only. In reality, one man ruled everything: Gaius Julius Caesar. After winning a brutal civil war against his rival, Pompey, Caesar had returned to Rome not just as a hero, but as its master. He was declared dictator, perpetuo dictator for life. For a society that had thrown out its last king centuries earlier and deeply feared the idea of monarchy, this was a terrifying development. Caesar's power was absolute. He controlled the treasury, he commanded the armies, and he was even reshaping the Senate by filling its ranks with his own supporters. This much power in one man's hands felt like a betrayal of every Roman tradition. Whispers started getting louder when, during the Lupercalia festival, his loyal consul Mark Antony offered him a royal crown not once, but 3 times. And even though Caesar refused it, many saw this as a publicity stunt, a way to test the public's mood and a clear sign of his ambition to be king. This fear of a new king was the official justification for the plot. But politics is always personal. For many of the 60+ senators who eventually joined the conspiracy, their reasons were a messy combination of high principle, bitter envy, and personal grudges. At the very heart of it all were 2 very different men: Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus. Cassius was the real engine of the conspiracy, a man driven by a fierce personal hatred of Caesar. He was a skilled military man in his own right, and he felt that the dictator had repeatedly overlooked and insulted him, holding him back from his own ambitions. For Cassius, Caesar's rule was both a professional and a personal insult. It was Cassius who started organizing the secret meetings, looking for others who felt the same way. But Cassius knew the plot needed more than just a handful of resentful senators. It needed to look legitimate. It needed a symbol of republican values. It needed Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus was a respected philosopher and a direct descendant of the legendary Lucius Junius. Brutus, the man who founded the Roman Republic by kicking out its last king. The weight of that family name was immense. But Brutus was also a close friend of Caesar's. Caesar had pardoned him for fighting with Pompey in the civil war and had even given him a high-ranking position. This made the decision agonizing for him. Brutus was torn between his loyalty to a friend and what he saw as his sacred duty to Rome. Cassius pushed him relentlessly, leaving anonymous notes for Brutus to find, urging him to live up to his ancestor and save the Republic. In the end, Brutus made his choice. He loved Caesar, but he loved Rome more. His involvement gave the conspiracy a mask of righteous purpose. With these 2 at the core, the plot grew, pulling in men who all had their own scores to settle. Men like Decimus Brutus, another one of Caesar's supposedly closest friends, who felt his career had stalled. Together, they were a dangerous mix of high-minded ideals and bitter personal hatred, all focused on a single, deadly goal. The plot started coming together in secret meetings in late February of 44 BC. The conspirators knew they had to act fast. Caesar was scheduled to leave on March 18th for a massive military campaign in the east. If he left Rome, he'd be surrounded by his loyal armies for years. The opportunity would be gone forever. Their window was closing. This urgency forced them to pick a day, a place, and a method. They considered ambushing Caesar on one of his favorite walks, but the risk of his friends and guards intervening was too high. They needed a controlled environment. The location they settled on was the Theatre of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting temporarily. The irony was almost poetic. Caesar would be killed in a building erected by his great rival, and his body would fall at the base of Pompey's statue. Crucially, it was a place where only senators were allowed, meaning Caesar would be cut off from his armed guards. The date was set for the Ides of March, March 15th, the final Senate meeting before Caesar was due to leave. The method was to be personal and symbolic. Death by dozens of dagger thrusts. Over 60 senators were in on the plot. The idea was that if everyone took part, it wouldn't be seen as a murder, but as the collective, patriotic execution of a tyrant, and daggers could be easily hidden under their togas. But there was a problem. Caesar's powerful co-consul, Mark Antony. Some of the plotters, led by Cassius, argued that Antony had to die too, but Brutus flatly refused. He insisted that their mission was to kill a tyrant, not to start a political bloodbath. Killing Antony would make them look like common murderers, not liberators. And Brutus's argument carried the day. The new plan was for one of the conspirators to simply detain Antony outside the Senate chamber and keep him from interfering. Then there was Decimus Brutus. His role was perhaps the most treacherous of all. As one of Caesar's closest friends, he was their insurance policy. The plotters knew Caesar could be superstitious and that there were rumors of bad omens. If Caesar decided not to go to the Senate, it was Decimus's job to go to his house and personally convince him to come. He even had a group of his own armed men stationed nearby, just in case their targets somehow escaped the initial attack. The plan was set. The players all had their parts. All they could do was wait for the Ides of March. The night before the Ides, Caesar was at a dinner party. When the conversation turned to the best way to die, Caesar looked up and said, "A sudden one." That very night, his wife Calpurnia was tormented by nightmares, dreaming she saw her husband murdered. She woke up in a panic and begged him not to leave the house. Caesar wasn't a man who was easily scared by superstitions, but his wife's pleading, combined with some unfavorable animal sacrifices that morning, gave him pause. A fortune teller named Spirina had famously warned him weeks before to beware the Ides of March. On his way to the Senate, Caesar saw Spirina in the crowd and joked, "The Ides of March have come." The soothsayer replied grimly, "Aye, Caesar, but not yet gone." At first, Caesar actually gave in to his wife's fears and decided to stay home. When the news reached the conspirators, panic set in. Their whole plan was about to fall apart. So, just as they'd planned, Decimus Brutus was sent to Caesar's house. With chilling confidence, he laughed off the omens and shamed Caesar for listening to a woman's dreams. He reminded Caesar that hundreds of senators were already waiting to honor him. Not showing up would be a huge insult. Decimus's words worked. Swayed by his friend, Caesar changed his mind and set off for the Senate. As he entered the Theatre of Pompey, another conspirator intercepted Mark Antony and pulled him aside into a long conversation, isolating Caesar exactly as planned. Inside, Caesar took his seat. The plotters closed in, gathering round him as if they were presenting a petition. One of them, Julius Caesar, grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it down from his neck. It was the signal. Casca struck the first blow, a shallow cut to the neck. Startled, Caesar cried out and tried to defend himself, stabbing back at Casca with his stylus, a sharp writing tool. But it was too late. The others swarmed him in a frenzy of flashing daggers. Cassius slashed at his face. Decimus, the man who had just led him to his death, stabbed him in the thigh. Blinded by his own blood, Caesar stumbled and collapsed at the foot of the statue of his old rival, Pompey. The conspirators kept stabbing him as he lay on the ground. He was stabbed 23 times, though a physician later determined that only one of those wounds had been fatal. Ancient historians disagree on what his last words were, but the most famous account is that when he saw Marcus Brutus, his friend, his protege, in the crowd of attackers, he stopped fighting, pulled his toga over his head, and said with disbelief, "You too, Brutus." He had accepted his fate, delivered by the hands of the men he trusted most. As Caesar's body lay on the Senate floor, the conspirators marched out into the city, holding up their bloody daggers and shouting, "People of Rome, we are once again free." They expected to be greeted as heroes, as liberators who had saved the Republic. They could not have been more wrong. The people of Rome didn't cheer. They reacted with shock and fear, locking themselves in their homes as chaos ripped through the streets. The assassins had made a fatal mistake. They had killed a man who, to the common people and the soldiers, wasn't a tyrant. He was a champion. They had completely misunderstood the mood of the public. Into that power vacuum stepped Mark Antony. Having been spared, he now found himself in a position of incredible power. At Caesar's public funeral a few days later, Antony gave one of the most brilliant speeches in history. While pretending to honor the deal not to blame the assassin, sarcastically calling Brutus and the others honorable men over and over, Antony masterfully turned the crowd's sadness into pure rage. He held up Caesar's bloody toga, pointing out every rip and tear from the daggers, and then he read Caesar's will. In it, Caesar had left a generous sum of money to every single citizen of Rome and had bequeathed his private gardens to the public. That was the final straw. The mob, enraged by Caesar's generosity and Antony's words, exploded into a riot. They built a makeshift funeral pyre for Caesar right there in the forum. Then, grabbing flaming torches from the fire, they hunted the assassins through the city, trying to burn down their houses and tear them limb from limb. Brutus, Cassius, and the other conspirators were forced to flee Rome. Their dream of restoring the old republic was already dead. The story, of course, doesn't end there. The assassination kicked off an epic power struggle that led to the rise of Caesar's young heir, Octavian. If you want to learn more about what happened next, make sure to subscribe. But let us know in the comments. Do you think Brutus was a patriot or a traitor? The ultimate irony is that the assassins achieved the exact opposite of what they wanted. In their desperate attempt to stop one man from becoming a king, they unleashed a series of civil wars that destroyed the Republic forever. Their act didn't restore freedom. It paved the way for 13 more years of bloodshed. And it all ended with Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, taking absolute power as Augustus, the very first emperor of Rome. The conspirators thought they were killing a tyrant to save a system. Instead, they killed a man and, in doing so, created the very empire they feared. The countdown to a kill on the Ides of March was unto just the end of Caesar's life. It was the beginning of the end for the Roman Republic itself.